So we're in April 1939 now. But for quite a few weeks, Miss Curtis herself has been quite unwell. She has even called a doctor out, and you know, she is not someone who willingly does that. She's got heart trouble, and in a letter to Clara that she wrote in 1939, she even said then that she'd been told that she should retire then because her heart couldn't cope with what she was putting it through. So, so she's seeing the doctor, but she also picks up, I think it's not said out loud, but I think she gets some sort of infection. I mean, she's really low, she's in bed, she has what she calls 3 stupid days. She doesn't write anything in the diary, and she's really miserable. And this next day, this is when the rocket explodes. And the doctor has been prescribing her digitalis for her heart. So Sunday, the 23rd of April, it's just after Easter, but she wasn't really up to joining in the Easter things. 3 stupid days, so they're blanks, she hasn't written anything. Stopped digitalis as hand began jerking too much to write. Read nonsense, rested. Badly depressed by another instance of the unintelligence of my students after such long years of training. The war stores ordered wholesale for emergency, as fully explained in Council of January the 28th, have been used. £28 China tea reduced to £2. 100 weight of sugar is now £28 or less, and so on. Incredible. They had been told to order for current use and hold these in reserve, and she puts in brackets £25 worth. That was probably a heck of a lot of money in those days. So, oh, and there's a little asterisk. £56 of mate ordered February the 28th, reduced to £22 in addition to China tea. Mate, I have learnt, it's a South American tea. She finds it really useful to drink. So it is, they have it as well as ordinary tea. So she goes on, hopeless to expect even cooperation, much less constructive help. Brains of infants have now decided to put lock on old dairy and keep all war stores in it, holding keys myself, and allow then only a week-to-week supply, which they must pay from petty cash, running no accounts. This will suit their childish minds and lessen my worry. Shall have to make up the deficit. Useless to expect help. Must struggle on to the end as best I can, trying to prevent their endless femaleness. Wrote note to Dr. O, that's Dr. Oliphant, who's based in Bridport. He was the one who was coming out. Wrote note to Dr. O on Wednesday to stop his futile visits. He is too negative. No one in Bridport worth having. Must keep well enough to do without. Have ordered Hussey, Ephraim Hussey, to come to house on Tuesday at 9:30 to help me put all stores under lock and key, and at council summoned for Thursday at 4:15, I shall put the household on weekly rations to be bought each week at Bridport and paid for by petty cash. Impossible to account for such consumption by 3 or 5 people in so short a time. Oh, next day, one line, blank day of depression and illness. I mean, she's still feeling ill. I do wonder if it was a urine infection, because she talks about the colour of her water changing. It can change you know, maybe that is partly what, you know, has led to the explosion. Part of what she writes on Tuesday the 25th, 6:35, beautiful day, weak, low, courage the only thing left, and precious little of even that elementary stuff. From 9 to 12, rearranged, storeroom, larder, cupboards, etc. at house, with Hussey, Sister Margaret, Mary and Evelyn. All war stores are now to be locked in old dairy and food bought week by week from petty cash. They have no more grasp of economics than children, in spite of all my years of teaching and practical training. Wrote out new plan for house and garden to be started tomorrow at council. Must accept fact of failure and make the best the discovery that of all the fools I've met in 71 years, I am the biggest. To spend a lifetime in trying to make silk purses out of sows' ears. I give up at last and shall keep my last days for writing. Woo! I think I feel for them all, actually. She was obviously, you know, she couldn't, it wasn't a time to try and sort of talk with her, was it? No one lives up to her standards, not even herself. So there are comments about all the sisters and their shortcomings. But I think you can get a sense, you know, she is very hard on herself as well. She said, you know, that perhaps if Lily had been there, maybe she could have helped her to not to get so far down. I don't know. I'm just wondering. Thinking in terms of Miss Curtis's family, not only were Phil and Eve here every month, and it is lovely actually to read that when they come, it's like a little holiday for her. They come for the weekend and she has nice evenings with them chatting. They'll probably bring her a cake, which she'll probably guiltily eat, you know, because it's not part of the Genesis diet. But she loves, she never speaks ill of them in the diary or in her letters. And I think she really values them and their company. I think she finds it really difficult to turn off otherwise. So, but apart from them, her youngest brother, he isn't here in 1939, but he had been in 1938. And certainly in 1939, she has every expectation that he will return. And there's a lovely little description of him in a letter that she wrote to Clara. So Clara is their older sister. And so she wrote this in 1938 when Edwin is here. So Edwin is the youngest son of their parents and had been living in China for a number of years. But at this time, his sort of main base is South Africa. And he had left just at the end of 1938. But this is a little description of him in a letter, because Miss Curtis, as she said, you know, she hoped that he would be nice, you know, a nice, pleasant person when he came earlier, before he came, because they hadn't met for 40 years. So they didn't know each other. So this is how he turns out. Edwin is a dear little man. Everyone likes him. And yet he is the most detached soul I ever saw. Always even-tempered, steady, kind, and deeply, silently religious. Says this place is the most peaceful and beautiful he has seen in his worldwide wanderings. So I think they did get on very well. And she had high hopes, and he's actually listed as one of the sort of trustees in here. He is listed as one. I think she really hoped he would come back. And in her diary, she's actually got a little sketch of a hut, a design for a hut that she had in, hopes that she'd be able to build for him. And Sister Margaret gave a bit of land that she owned near Four Winds where it could be built. So real high hopes. But by the time you get to the summer, I think she has realised that, well, he hasn't been in touch for ages. I think she's realised he's not going to come back probably. And I don't think he does. I mean, there's nothing in the diary to suggest that he does. Sadness there, really. And then I thought you'd like to see a picture of Clara. So she sent this to her sister Adela in 1938. And this is what, in the same letter, Miss Curtis says this in response to getting the photo. Your snap was hailed by us all as a very handsome and jolly old lady. I was surprised to see how strong you looked, because Clara has had a lot of ill health and family troubles that she has written in her letters. But I know how our family can rise to the occasion, even of having a photo taken. And I was distressed at your account of the leg veins, for they must cause you much suffering. You and Mabel, Mabel is the youngest sister, the mother of Phil and Eve. You and Mabel are constantly in my prayers, and I often feel it will not be long before we all meet in our real bodies, not these battered old earthly garments. Much love, A. Well, they both died quite a few years before Miss Curtis did. She outlived all her siblings. We're 1939 diary. She writes at the beginning of September, so we are moving into the war. I thought I would read some extracts from those first few days in September, so that we can get a sense of what things were like here when, just at that time. So, the 1st of September, Friday, 6 a.m, wet, cold, everything damp, had to light stoves, wrote on body till 10:30. That could be misunderstood. She's not writing on her own body. It's one of her books, The Divine Law of the Body, the one that she's currently working on at the moment. So she probably worked on it from 6 until 10:30. Mary and Margaret came up at 10 today to say, it has started. The Germans have bombed Warsaw and killed many civilians. Margaret shaky with Ted, her eldest boy, in Warsaw. He sent £400 to his sisters a few days ago in case he was killed. He went through the Spanish Revolution in frontline danger safely. Mr. Dittmer, the rector, promises to phone us first if there is an air raid warning in case we do not hear it from Bridport. Papers extraordinarily calm as usual, and so is everyone. Carl, who's the American, is amazed at it, says America is all excited. So I believe Carl and Julian are still here at this point. They were here for the summer. The next day, 2nd of September, Saturday, 6 a.m, dense fog. All prepared last night for quick dash to trench. So it is ready for use. Girls, that's Phil and Eve, who are in their 30s, girls very able, know exactly the right thing and do it at once and thoroughly. no havering or confusion, no limp waiting to be pushed. We all want to know what England is doing. Nothing yet heard but cabinet meetings. Sunday the 3rd of September, 6:15 a.m. Stormy night of thunder, lightning and torrents of rain. Fine morning, sun and wind, white caps on sea. Corrected revised proofs of Law of Word from 6:30 to 11. So that's another book. At 11:10, Margaret came with the news that war has been declared in defence of Poland. Later, Phil and Eve came after hearing Chamberlain's speech, which they said was most impressive and ended with a prayer of blessing. Took 12 o'clock service and gave address. Psalm 71, acutely appropriate. Also the first 5, which I read as subject of 3:15 lecture. And then these are, the next sentence is a verse from the psalm. Let all those that trust in thee rejoice. Let them ever shout for joy because thou defendest them. All warned to take gas masks whenever leaving house. Took 3 o'clock and gave first lecture on law of the body. All 3 Huttons present. So that is a retired clergyman and his wife, Mabel Hutton, and their single daughter who lives with them. But half as many as last Sunday. I am too tired to do the hill 3 times. Could not go for King's speech. I imagine they have a wireless, perhaps in what they call the study, which we call the office. Could not go for King's speech, but the girls told me how wise, simple and good it was. And then just one little last extract from the 9th of September. 6 a.m, fine day, quiet night, no firing. Did strong work at 9 last night for all our forces. And in quotes, this is another verse from a psalm. Let God arise and let his enemies be scattered. Spoke to Hitler, 3rd night running. He is doomed by his own nature. My message tells him so. So she was advocating that you should pray against Hitler, say his name out loud, and it would have effects. And I guess you could say, well, he was defeated. Perhaps that was part of the victory. So quite interesting, I think, to hear those early days of the war and how the community here was sort of taking it. I wanted to read something from a letter from Adela to her sister Clara. So this is taking it on into 1940. So this really is sort of getting into the war. And I want to read quite a bit of this letter because it gives you a sense of what's happening here and also the state of Miss Curtis's health. Dearest Clara, so this is January the 31st, 1940. So many long letters from you have piled up in my unanswered basket that you must be wondering what has happened. I have not dressed for weeks now, a series of chills and general fatigue. But today some energy has come back and I'm working off arrears by slow degrees. We are having a hard winter even on this mild coast. Food frozen solid in larders, very odd for us. The whole world is being taught a drastic lesson and many do not yet grasp it. She's talking about the war. Life has become so artificial, so divorced from divine law, that it will take much suffering before the bulk of humanity will change the false standards by which conduct has been ruled. It is strange to see the government now telling people to do the very things I have been teaching and practicing for nearly 40 years. And I had almost given up hope of ever seeing any result. This war was needed to bring the world to its senses. But why choose such an awful way of learning common sense? Man is the stupidest animal ever invented. This, she's got to include women as well in that. This herding in cities and neglecting the land is sheer madness. Thank heaven a few are waking up at last. All our cottages are empty and we have only one student now. People can't come from the towns because motoring is no longer easy. So we are a very shrunken community, though a happy one. All the men are gone and we carry on our land work with one old sailor, who I think is Ephraim Hussey. The chapel is shut up, too expensive to heat it now. But the prayers go on more than ever for all who so sorely need help, and the answers come wonderfully. All blessings to you, my dear, your loving sister, A. If you would like, there is another letter to Clara, written in August 1940, which gives a real sense that, you know, that they're in the midst of, they're not bombed as such, but, you know, there's a lot flying over, a lot going on. So this is August the 24th, 1940. My dear, I was so glad to get yours of July the 28th, 2 days ago, for it lifted a load from my mind to know you at last safely housed and cared for. It had troubled me so much to be unable to send money to ease things for you now in your old age, after the lifetime of service you have rendered. But the war has put an end to our work and our income. 6 of our houses are full of soldiers, and even our chapel is half full of furniture. For we could not afford to store it, and there was no room in Bridport for the contents of our big community house, even if we'd been able to pay for it. The labour of turning out house after house has been exhausting. My arms and hands have been crippled for a week, and I can no longer write decently, as you can see. Life is very strange here on the front line defence. Strangest of all in going on as if nothing were happening. Last Sunday, I was reading in my hut with all the doors and windows wide open to the lovely summer sun and air, when I heard long peals of continuous thunder and cheering and shouting at the house. Went to my porch door and saw every upper window crammed with soldiers who were watching the big air raid on Weymouth and Portland. Phil and Eve were helping to turn out a cottage at the other end of our settlement because a sudden order had come that more troops were to arrive to sleep here that night. And they saw 6 German planes crash into the sea in front of us. The noise of gunfire through the nights is very loud. And when 2 high explosive bombs fell in a field a mile from us, it sounded as if they dropped in my garden. The hut shook like paper and I jumped nearly out of bed. The Germans come over every night, and when the noise of fighting is too loud and long, Phil and Eve most bravely come up to see if I am all right. Their cottage is 10 minutes walk from me. They were living down in the studio, I believe. And they forgot the other night that the sentries at the gates would stop them with fixed bayonets and demand their business. They serve in our canteen every night, and all the troops know them by sight in the light, but took them for strangers and were very stern till they came close up. The Dunkirk men are here with orders that there is to be no retreat from this beach. and it is the same in every beach in England. Some of them told us that they had paid no attention to prayer since they were children, but on those Dunkirk beaches, we prayed for all we were worth, and we got a miracle. I pity any Germans who try to land in England. Even the women are ready to fight to rid the world of this satanic scourge. Goodbye, my dear. Tell Cabot, that is Clara's son-in-law, how thankful I am that he is looking after you. Love, A. So it was, they were right in the midst of it, weren't they? And the troops obviously were ones that had come back from Dunkirk and were recounting their tales there. And we heard about Phil and Eve serving in a canteen, and they joined the ATS, and that's them in their uniforms, probably in about 1940. We're moving now into the later period. You can tell from the letters that the war has caused a lot of disruption. People can't come. They can't use the main buildings because the army's using them. They can't use the chapel because it's full of their furniture. It wasn't completely over then. Some people did continue to come back. And even in 1956, Sister Margaret was acting as warden. She was in her 70s by then. And Miss Curtis, 1956, she was late 80s. So Sister Margaret was warden, and there are a series of little letters from Sister Margaret to Miss Curtis saying at the beginning of 1956, I need to give you plenty of notice because I will need to go to London for a week to help my daughter who is not well. I'm giving you plenty of notice, and I will be able to come back after the week, and I will have 3 weeks, plenty of time in which to prepare for the Easter students. So people were coming even in the mid-50s. After that letter, they obviously have a face-to-face conversation. And this is a letter that Sister Margaret writes following on from that conversation. And she calls Miss Curtis Elder. Dearest Elder, I am truly grateful to you for speaking to me this morning. I have felt for a very long time that I was quite inadequate to fill the post of warden, especially coming after you. I'd hoped that some younger student would come here and that you could give her my post. I also realised that I am not able to teach the students. Therefore, I resign my post as warden very willingly, but feel very sad that you have been so disappointed. I must thank you very sincerely and with all my heart for the help you have given my suffering children and myself. It was her son Geoffrey who was killed in the war. I know more and more how great the help has been and is. The teaching is the very greatest and higher, and I shall always be more and more grateful for it. For Christ is more real to me every day, and in this realization, I see myself as I have been and still am, as completely unworthy of his love. But without it, there would be no hope. With my love and gratitude for all you have done for us all and are still doing, Margaret de Pury. And I believe she was probably the last one to leave. For the last few years of her life, Miss Curtis was living. She'd moved down to Ancram, which was further away from the road, so less busy, less noisy, and she was here by herself. So I'd like to finish just because her niece, Phil, has written beautifully about her death. This is in her chronicle. She collapsed, so this is before I'm reading it. She collapsed and was brought into Community House, and a bed was set up for her in what is now the office. And that's where she spent the last few days of her life. And Phil says this: she had a wonderful death. Just before she died, she made a sound, and I held her hand. She asked for her shoes, and Eve pushed the bedclothes tight against the soles of her feet, and she was content. She then asked, "Where is Eve?" And Eve moved to the other side of the bed, and Aunt Adela put out her other hand, and Eve held it. Aunt Adela then asked, "Do you think I shall be forgiven?" I said, "Of course," feeling very inadequate. She closed her eyes and seemed at peace. After a little pause, she opened her eyes again, and her face was suffused with a surprised happiness. She was obviously seeing a wonderful vision and slowly saying, "Lovely, lovely, lovely." She closed her eyes again and was gone. So, a lovely ending to an extraordinary life.
Welcome back. If you have been away, we've just taken a short break for, well, I anticipated having coffee, and in fact, Megan had very cleverly made us all cups of mate, as drunk by Miss Curtis and some of the sisters in the past. So I really enjoyed a bit of mate instead of coffee. That was a real marathon session. Thank you, Liz, for all that information. We are going to have a short time now for questions, and I've already had some comments and questions come in on the chat screen from people watching on Zoom, and I thought we'd be, as a beginning, I'll just read through a few of those for you. Some of you can see them on your screen. Some of you watching this again on video subsequently, when we make this available as a YouTube, of course, won't be able to see any of this. We have comments of how brilliantly and generously researched and shared, Liz, from Graham. Angela says, really enjoying this unique opportunity to learn more about Adela Curtis and her legacy. Thank you. Julia, thank you, Liz, and others too. From Mary Hutchinson in New Zealand, again we have thank you in the Maori tongue. Thank you again, Liz, for your second presentation about Adela and the community. I'm wondering how they were regarded by the Church of England then. Also, do you think Adela suffered from depression and or other mental health problems? Question mark. I'm sure Liz will respond to one or two of these in a moment when I let her back to the lectern. From Cabot Sweeney, relative in the States. Thanks, Liz, for taking all those pieces of information and putting them together in such an interesting way. Really brought Adela to life. And a question, again from Cabot, are there any specific testimonies of people being healed after Adela's prayer services? It's always exciting to hear of what the Lord does in answer to prayer. And another question, in that last letter you read about the last warden, Margaret's resignation, Adela was called Elva, E-L-V-A. No, that was Elder, E-L-D-E-R, I think. So that explains the significance. That was a mishearing, Cabot. Okay, those are all the chats that have come in, the questions that have come in so far on the chat. But we may have some questions here in the room, and I'm going to ask Liz to come back to the lectern now.
She does, I think in the the little bit that I read out, she talks about being depressed. It does seem to be in the diary quite a few days where she's talking about either she is depressed or she has been. But you know, I would hesitate to sort of generalise from that, really. Was there anything else?
Any specific tests?
Oh.
This is again from Cabot,
Yes.
who I see is watching us there. Hello, Cabot,
Ah.
wearing a lovely plaid shirt. Are there any specific testimonies of people being healed after Adela's prayer ministry services? I
don't know. I haven't come across any myself yet, but who knows what's out there. I mean, one of the wonderful things about this period of time is all the resources that have been there in people's lofts or cupboards that have, sort of come to the fore. So I'm not aware of any at the moment, but that doesn't mean to say there aren't any. Mary
Hutchinson wondered how they were regarded by the Church of England at that time.
So the fact that I think, on the positive side, the rector came once a week and celebrated Holy Communion, and in the trust deed, it says that there aren't services here on a Sunday. People are encouraged, if they can, to walk the 3 miles down to the church. It wouldn't have been the sort of putting your life at risk journey, walking down that road, that it would be today. So I think in that way, that shows a positive connection. There is, Phil does write that she had tried, before she set up the charity, Miss Curtis had tried to see if the Church of England would take on the community as a way of, giving it more stability than just being something that was there when she was there. She approached one Bishop of Salisbury and he was interested. Maybe he would have taken it further, but unfortunately he died. She approached the next one, and apparently he wouldn't have anything to do with it because the community was run by a woman. So a mixed picture, I guess.
I have one myself, because Jeremy J is with us, Adela's great nephew. Jeremy, do you have any idea where the ARP, the Air Raid Patrol trench shelter was dug here?
There was one air raid shelter dug just adjacent to Burton Mere.
So that's that
was an air raid shelter. It wasn't a trench as such. It was dug into the hillside slightly with breeze blocks and then roofed over with corrugated iron. But I don't know of any other ones.
Yes, so Jeremy was saying that he is aware of a trench shelter that was dug near the bungalow at Burton Mere, which is one of those, the furthest west building, but he's not aware of others. I mean, I suppose as I was reading the diary, it seemed to be that there would be one more for the community, because that would be quite a long way to go, wouldn't it? So that the shelter that Jeremy is aware of was 12 feet long and 8 feet wide, so it wouldn't have taken many people. Ali, do you want to speak?
Yes, I do. Can I?
Yes.
When we first came to Burton in 72, and a lot of the stuff was still very similar to how she left it, but I understood that there was a shelter alongside the path up to Littleness, so about level with the top of the where the cutaway starts. There was one there, and there was corrugated iron along there, and it's all been covered over. And I think, from what I understood, that John Cross put a lot of stuff that the community at that point, or presumably he thought the community didn't want at that point, he put it in there and covered it over. That was my
He
understanding
put
of
all
what
the
had
oil
happened.
lamps in there because he hated the sight of them. All the old copper oil lamps. he
Mark
chucked
says the
them
copper
in.
oil lamps. Can you hear him?
John Cross was the first warden when Othona
Yes.
was here. And
Yes.
so you're saying that things that he didn't like in the house, he put into the
Yeah.
shelter, the trench shelter, and covered them up so that they would be, so they're out there to be found,
Possibly.
Well,
perhaps.
while we were still there, a digger, JCB was got in to collapse the shelter down. remember that.
Right.
So I had a go on it.
Okay, so maybe it isn't there then. We haven't got buried treasure.
Well, I
Well,
think
it probably still
maybe-
is. Yes, it's buried. The JCB smashed it, covered the
thing in.
shelter in.
Broke it all in.
But I could show you roughly where it was.
Oh, that would be
It's
interesting to see.
where the-
Yes.
As you go up the track to what's now larger, there's a big pine tree, isn't there? And it's just west of that.
Okay.
And it was all grown over for a while, but Maurice cleared it away.
Next time you come, let's have a look.
I'll point it out.
That's where I believed it to be as well. So,
Lovely.
I think-
There's a sort of hole in the ground.
Thank you, Ali and Mark. That's lovely. I think Claire in the room had a question. Claire.
I just wondered who was living in this area when Adela died, because obviously Eve and Phil were there, and some of the other houses, I think, were. I get the sense that people perhaps bought a piece of the land or built their own house on the land, even if they didn't own the land. So there might have been other people living.
So you're talking about, were there other people here on the land when Miss Curtis died, in the huts? So I'm not sure actually. I have read from Phil that they brought in a couple who were going to, just before she died, they brought in a couple to look after her, but then I think her collapse came, so, you know, they weren't needed. Jeremy, do you know at all?
Phil was living at the studio
Yes.
and she was basically taking stuff over to Anchorage to keep her going.
So Phil was at the studio and taking over things to Anchorage where Miss Curtis was.
There was nobody living in the other houses, certainly on a permanent basis.
Okay, no one in the other houses on a permanent basis.
And a week before she died, my mother, who was living in Berkshire at the time, which is quite a long way away, particularly in
Yes.
those days,
Yes.
suddenly got the feeling that they needed to come down here and clean out the community house, which she did. She came down on her own. She and Phil spent best part of the week cleaning the community house because it was in a terrible state. I mean, it'd been empty for years. And at the end of the week, that's when she had the collapse. And they brought her over to that study so and the place would therefore look reasonable and presentable as she would have wanted to see it.
So thank you, Jeremy. So it sounds like really she was living at Anchorage and there wasn't, apart from Phil living at the studio, there wasn't other people. And Eve had this sense that they needed to clean the community house, and they spent a week on it, the two of them, and that was just when Miss Curtis had the collapse and was brought into the house. And what they call the study is the office now. Yes. So she died in the office. Lovely. Thank you.
We have another question on the Zoom.
Okay.
I'd like to
Yes.
take that one. Can you explain about how, this is from Cabot in the States.
Oh, yes.
Can you explain about how the land came to Othona after Adela's death? What were Adela's wishes about the land after her death?
So I'll just very briefly, she stipulated that it couldn't be sold, that it had to be given to another group that was sort of close enough to her sort of aims and objectives so that in some way her work would continue. And I understand from what Phil has written that Jeremy's mother and father and Phil herself, so Eve and Kenneth and Phil, spent a number of years approaching different organisations, churches, charities, with no success. And then finally, Othona got to hear about it and decided that it was, because Othona was a summer camp over in Essex, the fact that the house didn't have electricity and light and, you know, those sorts of things, I think, you know, it was a step up from a camp anyway. So they weren't fazed by the thought of the kind of building it was. Do we need to, what, is it one more question, do you think?
There's at least one more here in the chapel.
Yeah, Rosemary.
I was thinking about the other sisters. I mean,
Yes.
I don't know who did her writing, but did they
Yes.
do any studying? Or did they just work the land? And also, why on earth did she choose white?
Well, so you're asking about what did the other sisters do, and why did she choose white? I imagine because it's unbleached. So, you know, it's as natural as you can get, I guess. And they, so we will hear tomorrow, when we hear more about Sister Evelyn, she certainly did a lot of gardening. And those who lived here were expected to do gardening. In this sort of schedule, the rule, the 7 times of worship, then there was to be in the morning before breakfast, Bible study, and then housework. So there wasn't the idea in this community that you get with some religious communities that some people are the proper sisters and others do the skivvying work. It was, they were all meant to be doing like we do, you know, washing up and doing the laundry. Not that there were people who came in to do those sorts of things for them. According to this, they were meant to have, it might be twice in the garden during the day, once in the morning, once in the afternoon, or that might be time when they have Bible study and things. So they are meant to be learning, you know, sort of intellectually and also working the land and running the house together.
I was just checking whether we had any further questions. We've got a comment, Rosie speculating about what Miss Curtis's Enneagram type, personality type might have been.
And what does she think?
Rosie's suggesting a classic Enneagram number 1. I think one could make a case for Enneagram type 8 as well. And forgive me if that means nothing to you, some of the people listening, but to many Othona people, the Enneagram as an approach to understanding the diverse styles of human personality is familiar.
I think she could be a 5 who moved up to 8.
So how would we?
We had a third suggestion there, sorry, from the hall here, that she might be a type 5 who moves into 8 under some circumstances. So again,
could
what
we
Enneagram speak?
Could we very briefly say, so a type 1 is always noticing, has a really high sort of sense of perfection, always noticing what isn't perfect. You could see that in some of what she writes. And 8 is a very energetic, sort of driving person. You could see that in her. And the 5
is the classic renouncer.
The renouncer.
Yeah.
So turning away from the world, do you mean?
Yes. So the person who could live very easily, would prefer to live in a very sparse hut and eat nuts.
Ah, yes. Okay. Yes, so the fact that she prefers living in a hut and eating that very simple diet could suggest sort of elements of being a 5. Thank you so much for being with us, and I really hope that you found it interesting and valuable, and I found it thoroughly engrossing and exciting to do the research. So thank you very much. We'll say goodbye.